المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة خدنا على درب الأمل زمر باص المدرسة صوت على قلبي عسل يلا يا باص المدرسة خدنا على درب الأمل.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Schools Out. I'm Shakira Akabo, and today we are focusing on tests and exams at schools. With me, I have a very esteemed guest, Mr. Idris Khamisa, who has over 40 years experience in education, as well as being a motivational speaker and talker in more than 30 countries. Welcome to the show, Mr. Khamisa.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Mr. Khamisa, tell us your opinion from your years of experience. Tell us your opinion on assessments at schools.
You know, one of the things that we've got to bear in mind, we need to ascertain to what extent that the curriculum has been embraced by the children, they understand what has been taught. So assessments must take place. But my real concern is the kind of assessments that are taking place. Not all kids, for example, can sit in an examination room, learn things off the way they do. And what we sometimes sadly do, examinations really promote the idea of rote learning. A kid learns off a whole chunk, yet to what extent he has understood the concepts leaves much to be desired. So I think there is a place for assessments, but my concern is the kind of testing that is taking place now, to what extent these are progressive, to what extent it does ascertain whether real learning has taken place.
Absolutely. Mr. Khamisa, there's a lot of research on how assessments should be ongoing, they should be focused on fairness, they should be learner-centered and allow the learner multiple ways of assessment, not simply written tests, but there seems to be over-focus on written assessments. Do you agree?
Absolutely. You see, one of the things that you've got to bear in mind that, you know, educational institutions, they are sometimes archaic, you know, they're stuck in a particular mold, and you find today, if you look at it, you've got to ask yourself in the end, the overarching aim of education, what is its purpose? Why are you educating our children? And the question is, are we educating them or are we schooling them? And it's a fundamental difference. And if you look at assessments today, they really test the cognitive development of the child. They look at his academic ability. And you and I know academic ability is not a predictor of real success. What about the aesthetics? What about the kinesthetic? What about the emotional, the ethical, the moral? Those dimensions that will make a person into a holistic being. But what happens that many teachers, of course, they are products of their own institutions of learning. They are part of it, they are complacent, there is no creativity, they never question anything, so they're part of that particular mold. And as a result, what they do, sadly, because many schools today are evaluated by the metric result, the exit examination. So what do? They force feed those kids, whether the kids are receptive or not, force feed them, put in all that information, and suddenly we say the kid got 6 A's, 8 A's, it's the best school in the country. And sadly, I must say this over here, and as a friend of mine, Ismail Katrada, reminded me that 70% of what a child learns is forgotten 3 months after the examination. And what really happens, we are not really preparing them for life, for the reality. We're not empowering them with skills, with the right kind of attitudes. We're not talking to them about life and living, which should be the fundamental purpose of education.
Absolutely. You spoke about the purpose of education, which brings me to my next question. When we look at testing children, are we being fair and are we being honest that this is what the child is able to do? And that is essentially the purpose of assessment. How can we encourage teachers to look at assessments in a more holistic way?
You say a fundamental thing. You know, I always say this, and I came across this from somewhere. I don't pretend to be the originator of this, that every child comes to school with 3 things: with an attitude, with a baggage of values, and an IQ. And Allah has made each one of us differently. You'll find it at home. a particular son of yours, with such ease he gets his distinction. The other son works 10 times harder than him, may only get 50 or 60%. And what happens? We reprimand them. Yet we are told, judge a kid by the effort and not the outcome. The fact that you got kids of varying abilities in the classroom, is it fair to test kids the same way? It is not fair at all. You got to test them in a unique way. And you find there are different kinds of assessments, oral assessments, they are through projects, collaborative, and the whole idea today, those people that are truly doing great things today, who are people that can work with others. What has happened, our testing has made people individualistic. It's about me, myself, and my achievement. And therefore what we need to do at our schools is to radically change the paradigm. For example, I know of one creative educationist who says that often when a teacher asks a question, the same child got his hand up, he's got the answer immediately. What he should do now, tell the student, Muhammad, the answer you got, share it with Fatima. Now give a collaborative answer. You are learning to share. So I think what needs to be done really, and the thing is the fact that I'm so happy to hear many schools in many parts of the world are now using assessments of different types much later. They're not using it in the formative years of schooling. In the formative years, they are teaching kids like social etiquette, developing the sensory perception, teaching them about life and living, you know, and using fun. Our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam used humor, used fun as an incredible methodology, something we need to look at.
Mr. Khamisa, most of our schools today have a culture of giving exams to primary school learners as young as grade 4. What is the reason behind this?
You know what, to me, it doesn't make sense. What is critical in the early formative years of a child, you got to create in a child a love for learning. And what has happened, sadly, today we stigmatize mistakes. We do not allow our children to make mistakes. And you look at the people that are doing well in society, are those individuals that tried something 1,000 times and then they got it right. We do not nurture the creativity of children. And once you have this examination per se at that time, you put undue stress. I was shocked to read in a book, it's called Under Pressure, a lovely book. And the subtitle is Robbing Your Kids of Childhood. He says children from the age of 6 have got stress levels. Then you got this helicopter parents. We judge our kids purely by the academic achievements. Children should be allowed. For me, I see a classroom as part of society. The way you learn to engage, the way you learn to disagree agreeably. Yes, you need to learn the broad concepts. The broad idea of the early stages for the child's development is to plant in the kid seeds of what? Affirmation, developing self-esteem, developing the emotional intelligence of children, teaching them about life and living. I remember the one particular individual who had the highest marks in the metric examination in South Africa many years ago. He was asked this question, to what do you attribute your success? You know what he said? And this surprised me. He never said my metric teachers. He never said my mother. He said my grade R teacher. He said, grade R teacher? He said, how come? He said, because she affirmed me. She developed my self-confidence. She enhanced my self-esteem. She gave me self-belief. So you are planting those seeds. And kids are very impressionable. Kids emulate the adult world. They emulate life and individuals. So you need to bring the slice of life into the classroom using the play methodology. Yes, you have some broad things you need to share with them, but once you have created their wonderful foundation, that could be a launching pad for other things to come. For example, in Japan, before they teach the kids anything, they teach the children about morality, about life and social etiquette. And our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that I've come here to perfect morals. Focus on those morals before you focus on information that might or may not be relevant for a child much later in life.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khamisa. That was an amazing interview. Thank you for your words of wisdom. And there we have it. With the way we look at tests and exams needs review. It needs to be individualized. We need to look at the learner's strengths, and that is what is going to take us forward and grow our children into lovely adults. Welcome back to Schools Out. We are now speaking to Leslie Hayward, who is the principal of Buccleuch Montessori Primary School in Johannesburg. And she's going to tell us how her school approaches assessment. Welcome to the show, Leslie.
Thank you, Shakira.
Tell us, your school has a very different way in which you approach assessment. Tell us about this.
Okay, so Montessori generally approaches assessment through continuous assessment. So what that means is that we are continuously observing our children and monitoring their progress. How this works is the Montessori system is such that the children actually get involved in their learning process. So we don't have that chalk and talk type teaching where the teacher speaks to the children in front of, the whole class does the same thing. Our children are all individually taught. So in other words, every single lesson is one-on-one and every child engages with their topic. So what we find is that the children take interest in their topics. They are passionate about what they learn. Also, they have that freedom of choice. And when children can make their own choice as to what they would like to study and what they'd like to learn, you find they apply themselves and they really immerse themselves in the topic. So this is where the assessment comes in. What their teachers, we call ourselves directresses, but for a better word for now, what our teachers do is they're constantly monitoring them through observation. They're assessing their work in terms of how they are the outcome. In other words, what is the outcome of what they do. So as a child is working with, say, for example, mathematics, they're working with the Montessori didactic material, which is very scientific material that is designed to show the children the way. For example, if you have a theorem of Pythagoras, you actually have a whole Pythagorean board.
Oh, wow.
And what happens is the children actually work with the board, with the different numbers, etc., and shapes. And what happens at the end of it is that they'll either come with a correct answer, but if the answer isn't correct, the material will show them. We call this correction of error. So what happens is that the children can see immediately, before the teacher's even seen them, whether they have got the sum or whatever it is, the equation, correct or not.
Okay, so
we then record that. We record their progress and their assessment on a continuous basis, and we can monitor them. So they have to have a certain level of mastery. In fact, they have to have complete mastery of a particular subject or a particular area before they can move on to the next. So in other words, they don't move like with a mainstream curriculum, they just move according to the curriculum. Here they move at their own pace, and it all depends on how they master that particular topic. So if they've mastered the theorem of Pythagoras, they can move on to the next level, So it's very sequential. So children cannot move on without being assessed in that manner.
So you mentioned now the theorem of Pythagoras, for instance, and your assessment is obviously not a written one. The child's assessment is probably active as they're doing it.
Yes.
So this shows that your assessment is very varied. Your assessment is not necessarily in the form of a test, so to speak.
That's right.
Could you tell us more?
So what happens is initially the teacher will present, say for example, the theorem of Pythagoras to a child. She will then observe how that child is managing with that presentation, because she'll present it, the child will then reenact it. Then she'll then leave the child with different equations or different exercises to do, and that will include writing, recording, measuring, whatever it is. She will then come to the child afterwards and see how the child has mastered that particular thing. The child will probably even explain to her about the theorem of Pythagoras. So in essence, by the child actually being able to explain the concept of theorem of Pythagoras and what in fact the child is doing is an assessment in itself. Then we move on to the next thing, and what happens, you find, is the children get very excited. They feel that they have ownership, they've taken ownership of their learning, they're accountable. And once you give children enormous respect and trust and you give them that accountability, you find that they actually perform at much higher levels than your mainstream schooling children. This is what we have absolutely found in the last 20 odd years that Buccleuch Montessori have been around, is our children are generally working at a much higher level than children out there. And this is something that makes us as Montessorians very passionate about what we do, because our children are very happy, there's no pressure, and yet they are learning profound work in profound subject areas.
And so tell us a little bit about testing and assessments at your school. Do they take place at all in the formal written way that we know them?
No. So we don't have formal examinations as one would expect in a schooling situation. We have testing in terms of, we'll do the odd spelling test, we'll do bonds and tables, just to kind of keep the children's mental acuity going. In spelling, what we have found is that that's something you need to test. So things like that. But we don't have that, we don't teach to the test. What we do is we teach to mastery. The process in Montessori is more important than the end product. And that is really important, clearly.
That's fascinating.
And
absolutely.
Yes.
So a very radically different way of approaching assessment, but also one that focuses, as you say, on the mastery rather than on just performance and what children can do at any given time.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Leslie. This
pleasure.
was an absolute pleasure interviewing you and finding out more about your school and what you do. Thank you. Now we are chatting to Mr. Abdullah Suji, who is the principal of Roshni Islamic School in Vereeniging, Gauteng. Welcome to the show, Mr. Suji. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's brilliant to be on ITV, and I think we're in for a fantastic show.
Tell us, Mr. Suji, we are discussing assessments today. How do you and your school view assessments?
Well, assessments in the school is taken from the fact of teaching the curriculum, which is KEPS, and following that assessment protocol, you know. And we do well in it because really we have to teach to the test. Having said that, all schools have informal assessments, non-formal assessments, and in that they form an understanding of the child to prepare the child holistically for a world out there. But assessments in its nature, you know, doesn't give a child the full scope of the skills needed outside the school environment. And I'm sure we can pick up on this as we talk on this program.
So you mentioned the full scope. I'd love to hear more, elaborate on that.
When we talk of the full scope, remember we're talking of all the schools-based assessments, which is SBA, and then you have your June exam, your trial exam in the case of the matriculants. And then after the trial examination, you still have the national examination. So if you look at it, our children are being taught to regurgitate information 3 times. And in this regurgitation, they are just giving you the facts which you have fed them with from the beginning of the year. So the full scope of assessments in the South African setting per se is that we're teaching to the test, as I said earlier, where we're teaching children to give back what has been given to them in different formats, whether it's an essay, whether it's a multiple choice, or whether it's the same exam. For example, the June exam of the matriculant is very close onto the trial examination for the matriculant, and the trial examination is very close onto what to expect in the final examination. So the mark a child would get in the trial examination would be marginally different from the mark in the final examination. So for assessments then, one has to be critical as to what its aim is, you know.
Absolutely. I fully agree with you. If we had to do things differently, do you think having one exit exam and then doing other learning assessments or other kind of assessments during the year will help?
It's an interesting question. It would help. However, we need to align our curriculum for that end and for that purpose. Currently, the KEPS curriculum is loaded with assessments. It is assessment heavy, and it is, I would say, syllabus heavy and content heavy. So in a space of 192 school days, which is negotiated then to a minimal of perhaps 100 actual teaching days, you are left with very little teaching time. So you use the teaching time now to complete assessments, which are non-formal, informal, or SBA, as I said. So children are guided to a result. And then assessments are given to a child to take home. And then the parents do the homework, or the parents do the project brought to the school with the rubric, and then the parent would demand a certain mark because they had done it. Whereas the child is not part of the development, you see. And because of that, you have issues related to assessments. With the fact of teaching time being encroached upon by assessments, the teacher then is in a quandary. Do I complete the syllabus or do I complete the assessment? Now the assessment becomes the demand of the hour. So the teacher will teach to that formal assessment or informal assessment because that mark is required now for the report. So we're not teaching critical thinking.
There's simply no time, because if you're saying or the way the assessments are eating away into teaching time, which means that leaves us less time to teach those skills.
Again, a very critical point you've made mention of. Having to teach critical thinking, it means you've got to assess a little less, in fact more, less. You know, you need to make children think out of the box. You need to make children believe in a solution and probably act that solution out to see what are the trouble points. Because our curriculum is designed in such a way to get an end result very quickly, we don't get children thinking. We do not teach children how to think, but we have taught them how to work a test, how to work an assessment for a report mark. In South Africa, we've mastered this very well. And perhaps in negotiating this very, I would say, troublesome terrain, teachers have to spend more time actually teaching.
Just to cover what they need to cover.
Absolutely, yes.
And do you think there's a way forward? Do you think that we could do things differently but still meet the demands of CAPS?
I don't think so. Because as I mentioned to you, CAPS is content heavy. And your schooling time is problematic. And many a times to teach that content in the limited time is also a struggle for the teacher. So we have to renegotiate the classroom. Teachers have to be reskilled in learning how to teach thinking skills within this domain of CAPS and make it such that children come out with a different skills set. At the moment, the skill set for the South African child is just sorting and memorizing. They are not, I would say, skills ready for the job market out of school.
Clearly, because rote learning it doesn't really teach the child much except, as you say, to regurgitate the facts that you've given them. And we need to prepare children for the 21st century, for the workplace, for the fourth industrial revolution, and they need to be adaptive.
Absolutely. You know, you brought up the matter of the fourth industrial revolution. That's the current situation we're in. We're in a situation where we've got to think out of the ordinary and make our children realize that already their careers have started. Because online careers have made some children millionaires, has made some people very entrepreneurial because of how they began to think. Because education is not what we're doing right the world over, I would imagine. Some countries have made phenomenal changes, you know, and some countries have done away with homework and examinations and assessments as well to a certain degree because the school is not compatible to the world outside. You know, the fourth industrial revolution, as you spoke about, it is also not compatible with the job market that is currently in vogue.
I would love to chat with you more on this topic, but that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much, Mr. Suji, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And that was it, a very interesting discussion on the purpose of assessment. What skills are we giving our kids, and where are we in this process of preparing them for the future jobs? Join us again next week for another episode of Schools Out. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.